Tamam, biz canlı yayındayız. Hocam buyurun.
Tamam. Herkes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. We are together with another talk of our Eurasia series seminar. And we do have a special guest, Aybike Şeyma Tezel, who is also a METÜ alumni. And Aybike is currently all but dissertation at Indiana University. In the flyers, you only have her affiliation with the Indiana University Central Eurasian Studies department. Yet he's definitely an anthropology major as well. He has extensive field research experience in Central Asia and China. She has been involved in excavations as well. Today, she's going to talk on the Blue Sea turned into Mulberry fields, identity politics, and Uyghur material cultural heritage. I'm not going to continue it further, as you probably hear some background crying noise. Do you? Sorry about that. But I will let Aybike start her talk. Please, Aybike, the floor is yours. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Thank you, Ashok. First off, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for having me give a talk at this very interesting and informative lecture series. I have been able to look at some of the lectures given throughout the year, and I can safely say that I'm in great company here, and I'm very thrilled about the Central Eurasian Studies representation, along with Middle East Technical University representation. It's really, today it feels like a homecoming to me, because the co-host of this event is my alma mater, Middle East Technical University. So I'm extra excited. Before getting started, I feel like I should, first off, I should just put it out there that I don't claim to be an Uyghur studies expert or a Xinjiang studies expert, because that's a whole different field. My expertise, my academic interests focus on the pre-Islamic period of the region, pre-Islamic history and archaeology of the region, along with the interactions between nomadic populations in Inner Asia and the sedentary agricultural populations in the central plains of China. So I am looking at this issue from a different perspective, in the sense that with years of field experience in China and my familiarity with the Chinese cultural heritage management, the practice of archaeology in China, I look at the Uyghur issue from more of a cultural perspective, from a material cultural perspective. And today I will expand on that a little bit. Let me share my screen to start my presentation. Okay, so like I said, I have been to China. I was educated in China. I went to school in China. I did field research in China in anthropology and history. I did archaeological survey research in China. So my relationship with China goes back in history. The last time I was in China was in 2019. I was conducting field dissertation research. And I was based in Beijing, but I traveled to other cities to see museum exhibitions, to go to archives and archaeological bureaus, to sort of get a sense of the material cultural heritage of the period that I'm interested in. While in Beijing in 2019, I saw a very memorable exhibit at the National Art Museum, prepared by the Jiangsu Institute of Science and Engineering and the Central Institute of Fine Arts students with generous funds from China National Arts. The display of the exhibit consisted of reproductions of about 130 works of art that were taken away from northwestern China in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by European explorers, scholars, or what the Chinese would call the foreign devils. The first time I heard this phrase was in 2007, during my first visit to Beijing. I was at an antique touristic shop and trying to bargain over an ornament, and in a broken Chinese, of course. I had just started to learn Chinese at the time. So I was trying to bargain, and the seller looked at me at some point in despise, and she murmured, "Bai Guizi," the white devil. I kind of got what she meant with that, but at the time, little did I know about the connotation of this term, the references to the impact of Western imperialism and China's lost treasures. This is still a controversial topic in the literature, as well as in international politics, inciting debates about cultural heritage, nationalism, Western imperialism, not only in the PRC, but also at a global scale. The originals of almost all of the artworks that were put on display at the National Art Museum in Beijing are housed in the greatest museums of European capitals today. Emphasizing this fact, the project director of the exhibit, Wang Yangsong, said in a press release, "Although Europeans took these materials away from us at the turn of this past century, our heritage is bigger than that. They can take the objects, but we still have the skills passed down on us from our ancestors. We now recreated these precious objects of our nation's cultural heritage for our children to appreciate. No one can take that skill away from us." The director's message was strong, but even stronger was the title of the exhibit, 1,000-year-old paintings, 100-year-old vicissitude. The Chinese word for vicissitude comes from the ancient idiom, "the blue sea turned into mulberry fields," which refers to great developments that would change everything. In a sense, the phrase refers to a total transformation of the world, the order, the dominant system. Ironically, at the time when this show was launched in Beijing, the Chinese government was constructing a new system of transformation through education centers, 教育转化培训中心, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, the land of origins of most of these artifacts. Not only those 1,000-year-old paintings, but the more than 1,000-year-old hosts of the region are being brought back home and being transformed through policies of the Chinese central government today. Once again, the blue sea is turning into mulberry fields for the inhabitants of Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, though this time not only the material culture, but also people themselves are being targeted. As a historian and anthropologist of Central Eurasia and China, whose work is informed by both textual and archaeological data, I think a lot about tangibility and intangibility of cultural artifacts in my own work. For example, what is that we're trying to unearth at archaeological excavations? What is being preserved in the museum collections? What do the governments refer to when they talk about cultural heritage? Is it simply the materials or the stuff? Wang Yangsong, in the aforementioned example, makes a good case about the intangible aspect of cultural heritage, which is in this case directly related to the official narrative of Chinese history and Chinese claims for national cultural heritage. According to Wang, the stuff could be removed or destroyed, but the real essence of it, the skill that created the stuff, retains with the original creator. the people of China, Zhongguoren, in this sense. By using these hereditary skills, the Chinese are capable of recreating the, and I quote Wang here, the precious treasures left to them by their ancestors that should be put on display in a museum to revive the historical memory, to promote a shared national past, and to strengthen national unity. While I was browsing this exhibit, I was looking for a certain 9th century painting of 3 Uyghur princes from Bezeklik Thousand Buddha caves. This is from cave number 9. And the original of the painting is at the possession of the Museum for Asian Arts in Berlin. So I was looking for this painting, and as I finally found it, I thought of the words of an Uyghur friend who had kept me company on my trip to the site in Turpan in 2011. I remember standing outside the caves. My friend looked at me and boosted with pride. He said, "See what a glorious civilization our ancestors built in our homeland, Batan, thousands of years ago." So apparently what Wang referred as the precious treasures of the Chinese national heritage were seen as their own by the Uyghurs. Just like what my Uyghur friend called Batan was just one historic and inseparable part of what Wang Yangsong would call Zhongguo, China, the central state. And my Uyghur friend belonged to only one of the 55 minorities of what this ancient nation called Zhonghua Minsu, the Chinese nation. So these conflicting perspectives on cultural heritage and identity provides an excellent framework to discuss the ideological underpinnings of some of the ongoing policies of the CCP in the region today. So in this talk today, I will make the argument that cultural heritage in China is an ideological construct. It is closely connected with China's national narrative that presents itself as a 5,000-year-old continuous civilization, unified and homogeneous. According to this narrative, people of China, Zhongguo, are one big family, culturally unified, and as ancient as the history of Zhongguo. In the multi-ethnic society of China today, oftentimes authentic indigeneity and cultural heritage of different nationalities, Minsu, is overlooked or redefined for the sake of this state-imposed national unity called Zhonghua Minsu. Today, by looking at different historical periods, I will analyze the place of Uyghurs and the cultural heritage of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, fitting within the politics of cultural heritage, nationalism, and the official historical paradigm in the PRC. I argue that what is happening in Xinjiang today can be viewed as Zhonghua Minsuization of the Uyghurs through a top-down transmission of the CCP values. By looking at my observations during fieldwork in the region in 2011 and 2014, I wasn't able to go to the region in 2019. I also wish to discuss how local Uyghurs respond to the official ideology pertaining to the history and cultural heritage of the region. Lastly, I will provide some insights about the current policies of the CCP and the subsequent ramifications in relation to Uyghur identity and material cultural heritage within the region. So as in various other parts of the world, archaeology, history, and pretty much any form of the knowledge of the past is an essential component of the state's nationalistic agenda in China. History has long been used in politics to legitimize nationalistic claims, both in domestic and international arenas. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the wake of the rise of nation states and the threat of being split up due to imperialistic aggression of Western powers, the elites of the imperial China started to tackle with the questions of nationhood and theories of history to promote national cohesion and collective identity. During this period, that is later referred as a time of humiliation because of the Western imperialist incursions into the region. Western imperialist powers were swarming into the territories of China with commercial, militaristic, and political agendas. During this time, there appeared the necessity of developing a Chinese history of a unified civilization that had been present in the current land of China for more than 5,000 years. This narrative of a historic, continuous, and unified China would provide the basis for a Chinese identity that would unite the multi-ethnic and diversified population living in the then contested territories of the Qing. Already in the early 20th century, we see references to a 5,000-year-old continuous civilization in the officially commissioned history textbooks, such as this trilingual Qing textbook written by a Manchu scholar called Rongde. The textbook is called A Comprehensive Textbook in the Manchu, Mongolian, and Chinese Languages. And I'm going to translate share my translation of the page you see on the screen. So our China, Zhongguo, the central state, is in the east of Asia. The climate is warm, the land is vast, and the citizens are numerous. 5,000 years ago, civilization started here, and it is the most well-known ancient country on earth. Our distant ancestors decided here, and they have lived here for generations until us. We're the people of China. How can we not love China? So Zhongguo here, China, is an ideological notion that positions the dominant political power located in the Central Plains, the Central Plains being Zhongyuan in Chinese, referring to north of Yangtze, and south of Yellow River. So this ideological notion of Zhongguo positions the dominant power in the Central Plains in the center of the world. So Zhongguo and the ruler of the Zhongguo is superior to all peoples, cultures, and polities outside of its borders. In that sense, for example, the Eurasian polities were considered as tributaries who had no choice but to submit to the authority of the Son of Heaven, the Tianzi, the legitimate ruler of Zhongguo, the Chinese emperor. The Qing was an Eurasian empire that ruled the territory of modern China for about 3 centuries. Having been founded by an Eurasian Manchu family, the Qing itself was essentially a challenge of this idea of a unified Zhongguo. And the monolithic and perennial civilization that it suggests. However, by conquest, that's to say by using coercive power, the Qing managed to establish the last legitimate imperial rule in the Central Plains, one that roughly shaped the borders of the modern Chinese territory, except for perhaps Mongolia, the other Mongolia. Historians of China, while discussing the legitimation of foreign rulers of Zhongguo, defined ethnocentric morality as one of the main principles of rule in the historic Zhongguo. Accordingly, one needs to prove victorious over the many competing regimes and follow Li rites and rituals to be accepted as a legitimate ruler of Zhongguo, regardless of their origin. So this Li includes ceremonies, good custom, and mores. According to Confucius, proper governance, proper leadership is the one that follows the rites and rituals, the Li, and many different groups throughout history observed the Li to legitimize themselves as the rulers of Zhongguo. For example, the Qing emperors, carried out ceremonies at the emperor's temple of past dynasties in Beijing to honor the previous rulers of Zhongguo and to sort of incorporate themselves to this line of succession. So from the early periods of Manchu rule, the Manchu phrase "Dudumbai Gurun," meaning central state, was used alongside Zhongguo in China. Therefore, the major tenet of the notion of continuity in Chinese history, both in practice and in historiography, focused on the idea of this central state called Zhongguo. Writing history was considered to be a central activity in documenting the legitimacy of the dominant authority, the Son of Heaven, or the ruling clan in Zhongguo, along with providing a rationale for a change of rule where it is necessary. So in that sense, the historian had a ethical political position where the historian recorded historical accomplishments of the ruling clan to sort of legitimize their rule. And this has been the case since the beginning of the historiography in China, which dates back to 1st century BC. And since then, keeping records of historical events founded in the Central Plains had continued as an important intellectual but private individual activity. Only during the Tang state in the 7th century, writing history was institutionalized and incorporated into the imperial bureaucracy through an office in the court called shuguan. From then on, each state had taken on the task of compiling and rewriting the official history of the previous one to sort of proving that they are the legitimate rulers of Zhongguo. And again, to provide an explanation for the vicissitude change of the rule that was taking place. The institutionalization of history writing under the Tang sort of formed the basis for the unified and continuous history of the Chinese civilization. However, the Qing in the 18th century created this canon of 24 histories that covered official records of the 5,000-year-old Chinese history from the first history book until the predecessor of the Qing, the Ming state. And by that way, within this canon, each state founded in the Central Plains were considered as succeeding dynasties of this ever-enduring political power called Zhongguo, instead of being considered as independent individual states. While these 44 histories are the most authoritative sources, not only on Chinese history, but also on the history and culture of the neighboring polities, such as the ones in Eurasia, including the distant past of current minorities of China, such as the Uyghurs. So when we're dealing with Uyghur history, and pretty much every group, the history of every group in Eurasia, we're reliant on the official histories of China. Although not as ancient as history writing, the initial development of archaeological inquiry goes way back in history in China. Perhaps it predates any other place in the world. Already in the 10th century, antiquarianism had been established as a field of expertise with typological classifications, semantic cataloging of ancient artifacts. Antiquarianism was the methodological path that archaeology in China, as practiced by Chinese intellectuals, had followed until the early 20th century, when the Swedish geologist and self-taught archaeologist Johan Gunnar Andersson initiated first scientific excavations at the Zhoukoudian caves near Beijing, where they unearthed the famous Peking man, as you see this skull here. The discovery of the Peking man was very important for indigeneity of Chinese civilization and the prehistoric period of to document the prehistoric period of Chinese civilization. But also interestingly, when the minorities policies were implemented during the CCP period, there were ideas about unifying all these minorities under this Chinese nation, the umbrella term. And some scholars suggested that all minorities come from this single ancestor documented by the skull of Peking man. So all minorities actually originated from the Peking man. This may sound like this Adam and Eve story, but that was seriously discussed in China during the time. So Anderson was initially hired by a Swedish mining company to conduct research as a geologist, but then he ended up training local archaeologists, and he influenced the development of scientific archaeology in China. Despite being instrumental in the scientific practice of archaeology, Anderson was the last of a group of Western explorers, famously called the Foreign Devils, Yang Guise, or White Devils, Bai Guise. In the 1920s, the Doubting Antiquity School, Uyghur Pai, within the New Culture movement, raised the necessity of evaluating historical sources from a critical perspective. And historians turned to archaeology to utilize another line of evidence to critically analyze Chinese historical sources and to discard mythology, late additions, and ideological biases. Before that, Chinese archaeology, the practice of archaeology in China was totally reliant on the historical sources. However, in practice, archaeology and material remains of the past were mostly used in service of historical accounts, and the material remains of the past were mostly used in service of historical accounts instead of challenging them even until today. During this period, Chinese archaeologists also praised the potential of archaeology to give a clear and more comprehensive account of Chinese society by shedding light on prehistoric period. Another important discovery during this time was the oracle bones, the famous oracle bones, which kind of documented, which kind of taken as a material evidence for the existence of the Shang state in 2000 BC, previously thought as just mythical. Well, with the abdication of the Qing government and the Republic of China closing the door on Western explorers and archaeologists, material artifacts of cultural heritage in China were being redefined as belonging to the Chinese nation, rather than being the private property of the emperor. With the impact of modernization and the subsequent process of nation formation, the intangible value of cultural heritage started to be discussed, and material cultural heritage started to be seen as an essential component of Chinese nationhood, Zhonghua Minsu. So in this formula, cultural heritage was at the possession of the state, rather than being prestigious objects at the ownership of the elites, but state was representing the Chinese nation, Zhonghua Minsu. So indirectly, national heritage belonged to the nation. The changes in historiography and the developments of archaeology in China was sort of going hand in hand with the concept of nation, Minsu, which did not previously existed in the Chinese literature. Minsu was coined in Japan by the combination of min here, which simply means common folk, common people, and zu, which means race, family, or lineage. The concept, as it was coined in Japan, was essentially race-based. The concept was adopted by Chinese intellectuals in the early 20th century, and it was contextualized within the debates on nation building and what's going to happen after the collapse of the Qing. That is to say, whether to overthrow the then weakening Qing or keep it as like a constitutional monarchy. These ideas were being discussed during this time. The Qing government had always prided itself for being a unified empire of a multi-ethnic population until the ever-expanding territorial extent of the country sort of brought this issue of integrating frontiers to the central authority into the picture. In 1901, the Qing government implemented a series of policies to integrate the frontiers to Zhongguo. And by frontiers, I mean Xinjiang, today's Xinjiang Tibetan Autonomous Region, Inner Mongolia, the inner Asian frontiers of the Qing. So a series of policies to integrate the frontiers to Zhongguo and define the Chinese nation in a more homogenized form. In the meantime, Han intellectuals were involved with the discussions about defining the place of the Han within the modern Chinese nation. During this time, two groups representing two opposing viewpoints came forward. The first, which was led by Zhou, was promoting a race-based definition for the Chinese nation, where the Han would be the ruling race. And the second group, led by Liang Qichao and Yang Du. You might be more familiar with Liang Qichao as the student of Kang Youwei, who had intellectual relations with the Ottoman intellectuals. They were in defense of a more cultural definition of the Chinese nation that is still centered on the Han, but the other ethnic groups were considered to be in the process of becoming part of the Han-centered Zhonghua Minsu. So this was sort of an acculturation. Liang Qichao is the first thinker that coined the term Zhonghua Minsu to represent the Chinese nation. In Liang Qichao's formulation, 5 ethnic groups were defined, and those were the Han, Manchu, Tibetans, Miao in the south, and Hui including all Muslims, including Uyghurs, of course. So these 5 ethnic groups constituted the Zhonghua Minsu in Liang Qichao's formulation. In the meantime, Manchu scholars, students at abroad in Japan, being influenced by nationalistic ideas there, started to publish a newspaper called Da Tongbao, in which they suggested the idea of melting pot of 5 races, namely Han, Manchu, Mongol, Hui, and Tibetan. So their idea of a Zhonghua Minsu was constituted by these 5 races, and they were melted into this this culture of Zhonghua Minsu in their formulation. The idea of a melting pot was actually inherited by Sun Yat-sen later, and the nationalist government of the Kuomintang. In the 1930s and 40s, assimilation of ethnic minorities was considered to be the only means for maintaining stability. Instead of a Zhonghua Minsu, that would include racially different ethnic minorities in the Chinese nation, and Zhonghua Minsu being more of a citizenship-based nationality definition. Zhonghua Minsu, a mono-ethnic entity creating with blending of different ethnicities, was preferred. Within this formula, Uyghurs are still not taken into account, as they are considered to be still a subcategory of Hui Muslims, and also the Uyghur as an ethnonym was still not formed during that time in the 1930s. It was in the process of being formed. All right, that's my, okay, I got distracted by the chat. All right, my field. So the history of Uyghurs is a complex one that consists of varying narratives depending from which perspective you look at it, right? So already in the 4th century, we come across the name Uyghur as a tribal name within the Inner Asian Haikarts Oghuz Confederation of Turkic-speaking peoples. And even before, their ancestors of the Stingling, were in the Stingling accounts, Uyghurs were not mentioned, but their ancestors were considered to be the Dingling. And I'm just quoting certain passages from official histories for you to read. I'm not going to read them out loud. Yeah, until the 8th century, we keep seeing references to the Uyghurs in the various official histories of the states from the Central Plains with respect to their relevant activities and interactions with the Chinese courts. With the collapse of the Turk state in Mongolia and the establishment of the Uyghur Khanate, Uyghur reappears in the sources as the name of this polity who once managed to establish equal position with the Great Tang state in the Central Plains, as opposed to the Tang official treatment of the neighboring states as vassals to Zhongguo. So for a brief time in history, Zhongguo was accepting equal status with the Uyghurs, which is like kind of a big deal. Throughout the 8th and 9th centuries, Jungar Basin and the north of Tarim Basin has been a battleground for the competing Uyghur and Tibetan powers until the collapse of the Khanate in 840. So this is a picture of Karabalgasum, the ancient Uyghur capital that I took during an excavation there a few years ago. Some tomb figurines from the Tang representing Uyghur officials in the Tang form. So with the collapse of the Khanate and the subsequent migration of peoples of Inner Asia into the Tarim Basin, the region turns into a permanent homeland for the next generations of these Turkic-speaking groups. Until the 15th century, the name Uyghur, written in different characters, still lingers in the sources, referring to the Uyghur kingdoms in Gaochang, which is Turpan, Dunhuang, and Gansu, and also an ethnonym referring to these peoples, referring to the peoples of these territories, as well as a generic term for to represent a certain category of peoples who spoke a Turkic language, who taught the Mongols a new alphabet, who worked as scribes and officials at various Chinese courts, administered long-distance trade routes in the region, carried out translation projects of the Buddhist texts, provided patronage for the establishment of Buddhist cave temples, and contributed to a flourishing urban life in the oasis of the Tarim Basin. The active participation of Uyghurs in the creation of cultural heritage of the region can be seen in the various scripts of the Uyghur language manuscripts, and the depiction of Uyghur officials and Uyghur donors in the antiquities. The Qing conquest of the region in 1759 did not really change much in terms of the administrational organization in the region on the ground. Initially, the Qing had redefined the term China, Zhongguo, and expanded its territorial extension so as to include the newly annexed Inner Asian territories such as Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and Tibet, to, like I said, maintain a pluralistic rule over a multi-ethnic population. While the Qing presence in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur region, represented by a military governor, the region was mostly ruled by local beygs who were mostly bound by their own judiciary systems. The system of indirect rule during the Qing continued until 1864, when the local beygs took advantage of the tumultuous situation the Qing was facing and revolted in their own regions to establish various independent polities across Xinjiang. The situation was put to an end in 1884, in which Qing declared Xinjiang as a province. From then until the end of the Qing rule, the Shang army government stationed in Xinjiang pursued what Xinjiang scholar Eric Schlussel calls in a recent monograph, a civilizing project to assimilate the Muslim populations of Xinjiang into Confucian values by rearranging institutions such as family and reorganizing people's everyday lives. The project was also aiming at transferring Han Chinese settlers into the region and educating people in Confucian schools already in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The late Qing policies in the region was met by varying responses from the locals that created, of course, different social categories, such as a group of secular Chinese-speaking Uyghurs called Chantuo, and transformed the society in certain ways. However, the Uyghur national identity does not come into the picture until the 1930s. Traditionally, Uyghurs identified themselves based on their local affiliations, that is to say, the Oasis that they originate from. Okay, I'm going ahead of myself here, the Oasis cities that groups of Uyghurs originated from. This is an enduring pattern throughout history. The Oasis cities, which used to be, each of them used to be one independent state in the early periods of history. They are kind of sort of culturally distinct from each other, but with the Uyghurs controlling the region, there are certain social institutions, certain traditions that unified these populations across the Oasis. But yeah, the Uyghurs identified themselves based on their local affiliations. So like identity was indicated by the town they're based out of, like Kashgarlık, Hotenlik. And I believe I told this story before, but when I was in the region in 2014, I guess, I saw people using these identities still actively during in their daily lives. So when an old Uyghur asked me where I'm from, I said I'm a Turk. I'm Turkish. He disagreed with me. He was like very kind of bothered with my response, and he said, "No, look, I am Hotenlik. He is Kashgarlık. Where are you from?" And then I was like, "Yeah, okay, Turkiyelik." So that memory, that identity, is still present in the region to a certain extent. So going back to the first picture, which I just skipped, the lowland beauty. So modern Uyghurs are ethnically the descendants of ancient Uyghurs mixed with local Indo-Iranian and Indo-European populations of the Tarim Basin. And you can actually see this in their physical appearance too, right? Some East Asian faces and also Indo-Iranian looks are also present in the region. But Islamization was also an identity determinant in the region up until the 15th century. Before the 15th century, in the 11th century, in Kashgari's Divan-i Lugat-ı Türk, we read accounts of the Muslim Karakhanids' wars against the infidel Uyghurs, and you would immediately think of the poem that I'm thinking about here, how Karakhanids came down on Uyghurs like storms and defecated on their idols' heads. So there's some sort of, ruining cultural heritage thing there too. So with the complete Islamization of the region, shrine worship and manuscript tradition came out as important practices that brought Turkic Muslims from different oases together and kind of gave them a sense of community and some degree of cohesion. The current usage of Uyghur was actually, as David Brophy mentions in his MA thesis, was kind of in use during 1911 by a reformist Uyghur author who used the pen name of Child of the Uyghur Balası. And he was, of course, referring to the Buddhist Uyghur kingdoms of the 9th century. So with the impact of Soviet nationalities, Uyghur was accepted as an ethnonym, referring to the Taranchus of Central Asia at a conference in Tashkent in 1921. And then it was adopted by Xinjiang Uyghurs in 1930s, but it didn't get that popular until after 1949 with the establishment of the communist regime in China. The Taranchi intellectuals of the Yetusu region, the Jetusu region, southeast of Kazakhstan, were the first to put forward the idea that the Turkish speakers of the Tarim Oasis originated from the ancient Uyghurs. So there was this idea of a unified history of Uyghurs as opposed to that of the Chinese there. In 1940s, Uyghur intellectuals like Mehmet Emin Buğra promoted the Turkey, the notion of Turkey instead of Uyghur, to write a more inclusive national history of the Uyghurs, to emphasize the region as part of Central Asia and connected to the Turkic speakers of what is called Western Turkestan. All right, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in northwestern China, which roughly corresponds to the territories of the Jungar and Tarim basins, is the homeland of Uyghurs. Historically, the region is called Western regions in the Chinese sources. In that sense, in the Chinese political order, the region was seen as a gateway into Central Asia and to further west by the states founded in the Chinese Central Plains. And you can kind of see that idea still lingering in the Silk Road narrative and the discourse of the One Belt, One Road initiative, that a network of roads connecting Chang'an to Constantinople or China to Rome, and trespassing the Western regions, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region today. So according to the imperial histories of China, because of the geostrategic location of the Western regions, the area has always been a matter of conflict between the Eurasian pastoralists to the north and the Chinese states, the states founded in the Chinese Central Plains. We are informed from the sources that from time to time, the Chinese states attempted to control parts of the region to protect themselves from, out of security concerns, to protect themselves from nomadic incursions. And one such case was in the 1st century when the Han state established garrisons in the Tarim Basin to sort of cut off the Inter-Asian Shungus connection to the region. This is important because the Chinese official narrative that frames Xinjiang as an essential historic part of China relies on this entry in the historical sources that the Han controlled the region already in the 1st century BC. The Tang, for example, established a much firmer foothold in the region, of course, because of the conflicts between the Western Turks. However, a thorough examination of the sources shows that conflict was mostly a consequence rather than a reason of the Chinese intervention in the region. It was not all that feasible for the states of Central Plains to try and exert full control or fully conquest the region because of logistical reasons, simply because the region is way too far to the core of Chinese states, to the center of Chinese states. When in the 6th century, the Gaochang king, the king of Turpan, requested to submit to the sway of the Central Plains, the Sui Emperor turned down the offer simply because Turpan was way too far. Even during the Qing, in the early annexation of the region, we see in the sources that certain court officials were really in favor of abandoning the region because it was just not feasible to support the region, because again, it's too far. All right. The extent of the Qing territorial expansion is unprecedented in the history of China. So especially considering the annexation of the XUAR and Tarim basins, the last Eurasian territories that were added to the Qing state, the region's relatively late conquest equals in the name given by the Qing in 1884, Xinjiang, the new frontier. Although Xinjiang is a political concept that has been used for other newly conquered territories. For example, the southwestern borders of Sichuan were also called Xinjiang during the Qing. But from the 19th century onwards, Xinjiang was exclusively used for the northwestern China. And since then, it has been inciting discomfort for the Uyghurs, who recognize the name as a representative of the illegitimate colonial rule that dominated the region. Whereas for the locals, the region was traditionally known as Altasher, referring to the 6 cities in the southern edge of the Tarim Basin, or simply the Oasis cities that they originated were the names that they would use for the region. In 1933 and 44, Uyghurs gained independence from the Republic of China, and they founded the East Turkestan Republic and the Second East Turkestan Republic, which were supported by the Soviet Union. Both lived very short in the region. The founding of the PRC in China kind of changed the whole nationalities policies, establishing Zhonghua Minsu, the Chinese nationality, as a supra-ethnic entity, and celebrating not just 5, but 55 minorities, Shaoshu Minsu, as equal citizens of the PRC. And this is the time when Uyghurs get to be called Uyghur officially, and the region named as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Just a fun fact, in the 1955 census, Uyghurs were 73% of the whole population in the region, the sheer majority. But since the 1950s, massive state-sponsored pan-Chinese resettlement in the region kind of changed the demography of the region tremendously. As I outlined the Qing imperial pluralism, Qing was accepting of all the ethnicities in the country as part of this whole Zhonghua Minsu. Likewise, the PRC accepted all 56 nationalities as equal citizens and just put it in the constitution, the PRC constitution, that all nationalities in the People's Republic of China are equal, and their traditions, their language are protected, their regional autonomy are protected by the state of the People's Republic of China. The PRC's promotion of multiculturalism echoed in the representation of major minorities on Chinese yuan, the money, the banknote, celebrating minority cultures through exoticizing representations and implementing affirmative action policies. Here's a very well-known picture, depiction of Zhonghua Minsu, the Chinese nationalities. And you can sort of identify here each nationality, right? Here we see the atlas of this Uyghur girl dancing, of course. perhaps a Tajik old man, Miao here, I can pinpoint. Mongols are playing their modern core. And yeah, all minorities are happy, are enjoying themselves and celebrating their affiliation, their them being a part of this Zhonghuan Minsu. With the affirmative action policies, you can actually see that the different minorities put their minority name in their IDs. Here, this is a Kazakh ID, Shapunjan. So when I was in the region in 2014, I believe, I was traveling to Hotan in a bus. And you know, the routine ID checks at the entrance and exit of each city. When the police was looking at my passport, the Uyghurs, the fellow passengers, wanted also to take a look at my passport. And I remember one Uyghur was very surprised to see that my ethnicity is not written there. So they would keep asking me what my Minsu is, and I would say it's Turkish, but they would keep inquiring, no, what is your real Minsu? Why isn't it written here? And finally I said, well, I said from a very nationalistic viewpoint, I said all Turkish citizens are Turks, so there's no need to acknowledge their Minsu. So that might sound really, that might sound off to some of you, but the Uyghur that I was talking to was shocked and was really, was kind of wishing, and they also told me that they wished they wouldn't put their ethnicity on the ID card either. Because apparently showing your ethnicity on the ID card might be disadvantageous in some places, in some situations, despite the affirmative action policies. So after the collapse of the USSR, Chinese political theorists got really anxious about meeting the same fate with the USSR. So they carried out a reassessment of the Minsu policy during this time. So from Shaoshu Minsu minorities and promoting minority cultures, promoting the diversity of the Chinese nation, the second generation Minsu policy is making more and putting more emphasis on Zhonghuan Minsu, a more monolithic definition of a Zhonghuan Minsu. Here's just an anecdote from the region. In 2009, the 5th of June 5th incidents was one of the biggest ethnic brawl between Uyghur and Han residents of the region. So thousands of Uyghurs in Urumqi took to the streets upon a fight between Uyghur and Han workers at a factory in the south of China, Guangdong. And they were protesting the government's failure in protecting the Uyghur workers. So the protests led to violent clashes between the two groups and ended with an equally violent government crackdown. Still, we do not know the exact numbers, but official numbers is that 156 civilians were killed, 1,700 were injured, 1,434 people were arrested, and the entire region were cut off from the rest of the world for months. And still, the censorship on the internet is from this period in the region, is inherited from this period. Okay, this is the Imam Asim Mezar complex in Hotan. I really like this place, and it doesn't exist anymore. The Uyghur identity is strictly tied to Islam, as I mentioned before. However, Uyghur Islam is unique in its adherence to Sufi traditions and shrine worship practices, which kind of detaches it from the mainstream Orthodox Islam. And this is the best written monograph on this issue is the Ryan Thumb's The Religious Roots of Uyghur History. I highly recommend the book. So since the PRC saw religion as a threat for Han assimilation, they started taking measures for restricting religious freedoms in especially Xinjiang and previously in Tibet. According to the leaked documents published in the New York Times last year, using the PRC is using medical terminology in their war on Islamic terror, like treating this illness of people called the extremism, the religious extremism. Of course, with the Bush administration's global war on terror, the PRC rebranded ethnic unrest in the region as Islamic terrorism. At the UN Security Council in 2002, the Bush administration agreed to add East Turkestan Islamic Movement to the list of international terrorist organizations, but the organization was never proven to actually exist. And I'm getting into Ashok's field here, but she can intervene and correct me anytime she wants. So I argue that Uyghurs are the misfit piece of the Zhonghua Minsu mosaic, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But going on, continuing on the history of the region, in August 2016, Chen Chuanguo was appointed as the new Xinjiang Party secretary. Having proven himself in his previous appointment in Tibet, Chen implemented strict policies in Xinjiang by increasing surveillance, police control, and finally the notorious re-education camps. Well, after this period, and I'm talking about 2016 and 2017, 18, but after this, the PRC took one step forward and banned cultural and religious practices for the Uyghurs as well. So here's a list of restricted names for ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. These are, so these are banned because they are, they have religious connotations, religious extremist connotations. But I don't know what's up with Turksat or Turkinas. Here's a flyer showing the banned clothing in Xinjiang. So apparently growing a beard is banned, wearing headscarf is banned, covering your face is not allowed, and wearing clothing with crescent and star on it is also not allowed in the region. Again, during my trips in the region, oftentimes my companions would wanna hide my passport because it had a crescent and star on it. So these policies was already there in as early as 2014, perhaps even before that. Another area that the PRC policies are kind of impacting in Uyghur daily lives is Uyghur houses. So the PRC is destroying the traditional Uyghur furniture and replacing it with modern furniture. You already probably heard of the Becoming Family program. So Han Chinese families are becoming families with Uyghur families, and they're becoming relatives, and they pay visits to each other periodically, and they also have to give each other gifts. And of course, the Han families are responsible for they have this task of teaching Uyghurs the Han values, Han language, Han culture. One of my friends, a relative, the Han relatives, were apparently giving too many gifts to her, and I remember her complaining about their generosity because she had to, she had to respond, she had to return the gift, And I remember my friends' uneasiness with that from my trip to the region. And of course, the Uyghur graveyards are being destroyed or renewed according to the official discourse. They're renewed, replaced by modern graves. This is kind of outrageous. And the re-education camps. Although the unofficial news were spreading from the region regarding the camps since 2016, people who could flee from China started to tell their stories in 2017, and the first reports from journalists and scholars came later in 2018 with particular evidence. The scholarship in the West and journalists did a great job in documenting these re-education camps, from satellite imagery, from witness accounts, and such. So we kind of know very well about the organization, the structure of these camps today. This is a very interesting. I mean, I find this very interesting. So the PRC denied the existence of the camps until 2018, right? But when the Turkish government condemned China for killing a renowned Uyghur singer, Abdurrahim Hayat, and this news spread through Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, and no one could trace the origins of this news, where it is coming from. So there was one day there was this news on Facebook. People were posting about Abdurrahim Hayat's passing, and the Turkish government condemned China in a, I believe, in a press release, press statement. The PRC, though, who had remained silent up to that point, released a video of Hayat. The picture of the video here on the screen, and a statement in which the PRC accepted the existence of the camps, but called them as vocational training centers or transformation through re-education in a more literal translation centers. So they're like schools, the kind of schools that the Qing established in Xinjiang to sort of teach the Zhonghua Minsu values to Uyghurs. Already, according to the estimates, the PRC was holding over 1 million people in these camps. The main aim, as they claim, of these camps is to clear up harmful ideas from Uyghurs and to educate them as modern and loyal citizens. The camps, all of the camps are closed now in late 2019. The PRC told the world that the camps are closed, but the people who were in the camps are transformed to factories to do manual work now. So the inmates in these camps were not only ordinary citizens, but intellectuals like professors, artists, authors, journalists, and such, who we don't know what kind of training they're going through. All right, I'm coming close to finishing up. So what is at stake in the region? Just like I said at the beginning of my talk, I believe what is happening in the region can be discussed within this idea of Zhonghua Minsuization of Uyghurs. So what is this Zhonghua Minsu as social reality? I put a few features of Zhonghua Minsu here, and please feel free to, I would really love to discuss these with you, because these are my formulations from my observations. So Zhonghua Minsu should be Mandarin speaking, should be secular, and secular in the sense that a state-controlled religiosity, should be patriot. Aizuguo is the slogan of the PRC. The unified history narrative is there. All minorities are essentially Chinese because they come from a single ancestry. Zhonghua Minsu by looking on the outside, should look Mongoloid, I would say. And that's why I think Uyghurs are misfit pieces in this picture. And they should be educated in the CCP values and should be loyal to the CCP. And I view all these as vertical transmission of CCP values in the name of, educating people, in the name of making people more morally fit to this definition of Zhonghuan Minsu. So there's a Silk Road narrative that kind of legitimizes the integration of Xinjiang, and Xinjiang being an essential part of China. And you can see this as museum exhibitions. For example, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Museum. There's a whole section of Silk Road artifacts where you don't see any artifacts, where you wouldn't see Uyghur history as in an independent section. It's more under this umbrella of Silk Road history. So Xi Jinping's China dream, when he in 2017, he mentioned this One Belt, One Road initiative and kind of formulated it as a diplomatic tool that preserves the position, the enduring centrality of China. Xi Jinping also repeated this history of more than 5,000 years narrative in the 19th Congress of the Communist Party of China in 2017. So making remarkable contributions to mankind and becoming one of the world's greatest nations is the China dream. And of course, the Silk Road is a proof of Xinjiang's historical connection to Zhongguo. What is at stake here? So these are the questions that I hope we can discuss maybe later. But there's this question, and these are the things that I'm thinking about. I haven't formed an opinion about this. I haven't made a decision, but I don't have an answer. But these are the questions that I put out there. Is the CCP, is the PRC abolishing Minsu policies? That's one question. By redefining Minsu as a monolithic entity, is the PRC going towards a more like a nation state? And a new phase of Uyghur culture and history, would a new Uyghur culture and society flourish abroad in diaspora communities? And this question was inspired by famous Uyghur poet Tahir Hamid. During our interview for a publication, we asked him this very question: what is at stake for Uyghurs? And we asked if he thought the Uyghur culture will be annihilated, will be wiped off. And he said he believes and hopes that a new form of Uyghur culture is in the making in diaspora communities abroad. To conclude, I wanted to put this poem of Abdurrahim Ötkür is to sort of make us all think about how Uyghur history were imagined by the Uyghurs themselves, and what the future is thought to be bringing for them. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Aybike. This was a brilliant presentation. I guess a lot of us also agrees with me and agree with me that this was a brilliant presentation, not only to understand what is going on in Xinjiang today, has this deep historical roots, and also kind of also helps us to understand that Uyghurs' rightful claim to the territory and in a historical archaeological perspective, how the rightful claim to the territory, people, land connection is established really well. If I may ask the first question, and the questions that Aybike also raised at the end of the presentation were also very interesting. I would be happy if we can discuss this further. So it's a lot of similarities with, I'm more familiar with the Soviet nationalist policy, but obviously, before the Xi Jinping era, it was just like the Soviet multi-ethnic nation, even though the Russians were like the first among the equals, and I guess Han Chinese in this case as well, first among the equals, minorities, everyone is equal, we're all happily living in whatever this state. But I guess it's changing, or I wonder, this people's lands connection, how much will the younger generation or the future generations will be aware of that they are actually part of the land, entitled to the territory, or how much in the currently in the official history this is given to the maybe Uyghur children, or perhaps other minorities like a Kazakh or Mongolian or Tibetan kid would know about this connection with the land. Will be my, I think it's a little too, a lot of questions involved, but I mean, if you can answer, but
sure,
that would be great.
Thank you for the question. I forgot to include that in my presentation. I was actually, so I'm packing because I will be traveling soon, and I was flipping through my old books that I bought in China in the past, in Xinjiang. In one of these books published by the the Bureau of Cultural Relics in Xinjiang, this was published in 2012. In the very first page, it says, it makes it, it puts it there that Xinjiang, the whole paragraph starts with Xinjiang is an inseparable historic part of China, Zhongguo. So already in the official narrative, both in the region as taught by the CCP, the official schools within the CCP education system, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was essentially a part of China, and Uyghurs were, so there are two narratives for Uyghurs. One suggests that Uyghurs migrated from Inner Asia into the region later in the 9th century, so they are not the indigenous populations in the region. The other discourse, the other narrative suggests that all minorities, all ethnic minorities are essentially Chinese. They're essentially part of this Zhonghua Minsu. So there's no question of indigeneity or racial or ethnic differences there. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that definitely.
As for the people's connection with the land today, I can safely say that I have no idea. I have friends here in diaspora in Bloomington, in Turkey, that I'm in touch with, but I would say they have bigger concerns than their connections with the land. You know what I mean? Like their immediate family members are like suffering there, so they're more thinking about that instead of this losing their identity or losing their land thing. So yeah, that deserves maybe a separate research on its own.
Sure, I understand. Anyways, I'll ask my later questions later, because we have many people also asking a question. If we go
in the
you
chat.
know, as a questions, yeah, in the chat box, we usually do this in this format. People type their questions there, but we would ask, unless they have a problem with it, ask them to you know, direct their questions themselves. So I guess Filiz Aydın has the first question. I just use my you know,
Hello.
right,
Yes,
to ask questions.
Filiz, yes. Thank you for this great presentation. It was very enjoyable. And like Işık Hoca, while listening to you, I kept drawing a lot of parallels with the Soviet case. And I was thinking what a nice article it would be to compare, especially with regards to Crimean Tatars. You know, I'm working on Crimean Tatars, and there are so many commonalities with regards to the question of indigeneity, you know, who came first, and several recolonization policies that has began in history, like in the first annexation of Russia in the 18th century. And today, after the second annexation of Russia, we see again a recolonization and in resettlement of almost 1 million people, Russians, from inner Russia to Crimea. So there are so many parallels. But I just wanted to hear, I mean, if you are a little bit familiar with the Soviet case as well, can you make any comparisons? Because for example, the difference I saw is Russia doesn't have this kind of racialization. I mean, it doesn't expect people to look like Russians, right? Russian kind of, I guess, nationalities policy is more cultural. So as long as, you know, you speak Russian and operate in the Russian culture, I don't know, whatever, like you listen Russian music and like Russian movies, it's okay. I mean, they don't want you to be the same, right? With the Russians. I mean, what's your thought? That was my first question. And also I wanted to learn more about, I didn't know about it, late 19th century re-education camps. You said it was done before and now it's being done again. So like, did they learn it from history, or is this new camp something completely different? I mean, can you I don't know much about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the questions. And I wish I had more knowledge of the Soviet case so I could make a better comparison. But I just wanted to point out that the looks, the appearance thing is more of, that's my inference. That's what I'm thinking Zhonghua Minsu is referring to, right? And that's probably, and that makes me think that Uyghurs are kind of the misfit piece of that picture because they look different essentially. And that's because during my field research in the region, from my experience, I know that, so in Urumqi, the north of Urumqi is populated by Han and south is more Uyghur. So when I would travel from north into south of Urumqi, I was able to see the changing, I was able to detect, and I couldn't help but look at the changing faces, the changing scripts on the, in the streets, even the odor inside the bus, and things like that, were like making you feel like you're traveling from one cultural sphere into another. And my experience in the Han Chinese regions in Urumqi was totally different than me in the Uyghur region. So for instance, in the Uyghur regions, Uyghur, by looking from outside, right, they would take me as Uyghur. I'm like just Uyghur to them until I open my mouth. But in the Han regions, again, I am Uyghur, but their treatment of me would be very different. So once at a KFC-like fried chicken place, me and my Uyghur friend who by the way looked more East Asian than I do. I totally don't look East Asian. So we were sitting at the second floor of that fried chicken place, and the waitress came up to us and asked us to leave. And we were like, why? She said, because we're gonna clean this place and close it. But there were like other tables and people, Han Chinese, sitting at the other tables. So my friend was angry and she said, we're just gonna leave when they leave. We're not leaving before them, before they do so. But the waiter insisted, and she literally kicked us out. And that was like these kind of experiences, you know, make you feel like you do not fit in. You are different because you look different, and by looking different, you're being treated differently. This could happen to a total foreigner too, who look like me, Uyghurs, or like any of us. But for Uyghurs, this is a daily. This is in their daily lives, right? They encounter
me, I
this.
think I would fit in. I think.
Yeah, definitely. You're lucky in this. But then again, I really want to point this out. I conducted field research in the south of China too, in Guizhou, Jingzhou, Hunan, in those in the rural areas of those provinces, with among the Miao and Dong minorities who are also not Han Chinese. So in those regions, people would take me as Han Chinese, because some of those people in those regions had never seen any Han Chinese, because I'm coming from Beijing with the group. They would think I'm also Han Chinese. So the looks to them, my look to them, was representing the foreign, which is the Han Chinese. To the Han Chinese, I'm representing again the foreign, which also includes the looks of Uyghurs. I don't know if I could. I was able to answer your question, but
yeah, thank you. And the thing about re-education camps?
Yeah, I was looking for that. Okay, yeah, I probably need to correct myself. The 19th century Confucian schools in Xinjiang cannot be named as re-education camps. If I said so, I stand corrected now. It's not what I meant. But in a sense, they were also promoting educating people, Uyghurs, Muslims, to with Confucian values, right? To turn them into Confucians, the Confucianists. So that's actually a common practice in the history of China. The transformation narrative, the transformation discourse that I mentioned, and I try to maintain that as an enduring theme throughout my talk, because I'm very occupied by that theme, because from my period, the period that I study, the 7th and 8th centuries, when inner Asians submit to the Chinese states, the states in the Central Plains, they go through a transformation process too, and we see that in the tomb inscriptions of those people. It is stated clearly in the tomb inscriptions that these people came from this uncivilized world, uncivilized in cultural sense. They came from that world, and then they learned Confucian values. They learned Li, their rituals and rites and morals, and they gradually become civilized. So there's this civilization notion there. But this, again, this transformation, this re-education notion has been present, was present in the Cultural Revolution period also. The again, fun fact, the brainwashing in English and in all other languages is actually originated in the Chinese, in Taoist Xinao, heart washing, which was redefined by during the Cultural Revolution as Xinao, brainwashing. So that's It's like the education was there, educating people to normalize them was present throughout the history of China. But yeah, I wouldn't call the 19th century schools in Xinjiang as re-education camps.
Thank you. And propaganda emerged from Russian. So the concept of propaganda.
Sadly. But thank you very much, Filiz Hocam, and it was nice seeing you here. I guess we have a couple of other questions. Stephen Bahri, I guess, has a set of questions. I will let him ask his questions himself if it's okay.
Thanks very
Please.
much. Some of what I was going to ask has been touched upon. I've been doing work on multilingual education, languages and education in Central Asia and in Northwest China, but my field work was in Gansu, not in Xinjiang. But I did have the chance to visit Xinjiang Normal University and talk to some of the researchers there who were working on the bilingual education of the time, Uyghur Chinese language and so on. But I worked over 10 years ago in Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan. So I'm very curious about, for example, the Tajiks of Xinjiang, who are a very small group living in Southwest Xinjiang, the Kyrgyz and so on. I met a young woman in Kyrgyzstan 3 years ago whose grandfather was a leader in Kizilsu in Xinjiang in the 1950s, but now she's for various reasons in Kyrgyzstan. So I'd like to know, did you meet with people of the other nationalities at all in Xinjiang, and what is their attitude towards Uyghur nationality, Uyghur language, and Chinese, the Zhonghua Minsu idea and the Chinese language, and what would they see as their ideal? Because in my field work, I read this scholar Ma Rong, and he did a study where he asked minority people in a very poor area, would you rather have monolingual education in your language, or would you rather have the education in Chinese? But the Chinese program was in the town with more resources, and the one in their language was in the village with no resources. And he said, even the ethnic parents prefer Chinese language education. But those are the only two options that were given. So I ended up in my fieldwork asking, if it were possible to learn more than one language well, or 2 or 3 languages, would you rather have a very effective, balanced bilingual education where you learn your language well and you learn Chinese well? Then what would you say? Well, pretty much all of the parents and most of the kids said, well, if that were possible, that would be great. So I'm just wondering what the image of the ideal system might be that the people you spoke to had in mind. Because I also mentioned in one of the questions that the scholars in Lanzhou at the Northwest Normal University were doing a lot of research on multicultural education, and they were talking a lot about this Zhonghua Minzu idea. And they were talking about, they picked it up, I couldn't understand it in Chinese, ma sai ke, horse race something, but it turns out it was the English word mosaic. And they were pushing for keep your identity, but many beautiful colors together, which is the same as like those pictures of the beautiful costumes and so on. But they were saying through multicultural education, we can do this. And they were really quiet about the language part. I'm not sure if they thought about that. And they also talked about Ronghe fusion, but they seem to be rejecting it without absolutely saying so in direct terms, but they seem to be arguing for the mosaic for Gansu. They're a little bit quiet the last 5 years, but in the early years of this century, they were pushing that strongly. So if you could just comment on a few of those things, I'd be very happy.
Thank you. And again, I would like to repeat that this is not really my specific field of expertise. So the things that I say is just the things that I gathered during my field research. But
you were there. The people with the expertise didn't go there. So whatever your impressions are, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll start with the last thing you said, because that reminded me of something else. The Minsu, Northwest Minsu University, Xibei Minda in Lanzhou.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know what students call that university?
Not sure. I have a close colleague who is professor of Tibetan language and literacy there, but he's in Canada now. I can ask him, but I don't know.
So in like, you know, in colloquial and in casually, the students, the minority students call the place as DR Dongyuan.
CR Dunga.
DR Dongyuan.
What
The
is CR?
second DR, the second
Oh.
the second zoo, the second national
Oh my
zoo.
God.
Yeah, and that so that's something that I heard from my friends at Shibei Minda, right? But that was also something that I heard from my older friends who are older than me, who went to school to the Zhongyang Minsu Daxue, and they
Yeah.
had the same rhetoric too. And
Sure.
that's because the you know, the minorities policy in the PRC is all about celebrating different minority cultures, but
Yes.
that's more like people, more like objects instead of
Yes.
peoples, objectifying peoples, right? Ethnicizing them. So we
Minority
see,
people are very good at singing and dancing.
of course, yeah.
This is
yeah,
what one
Uyghurs
principal
are-
told me in an interview. They're
Yeah.
very good at singing and dancing and sports.
And you know,
and sports.
like ordinary Han Chinese are like, when talking about this, they're like talking with utterly positive feelings. They're like very appreciating the dancing and singing skills of minorities, but they just don't probably think that it's a form of reductionism, right?
Yes.
But don't we also see this in area studies departments in the West? Like,
Well, you know, the theorists of multicultural education talk about the contributions approach where, you know, a school will have, you know, the food day and every kid can bring some food from their culture and their special clothes.
yeah.
And they do feel proud about that, but it's just in that compartment, 1 day a year, 2 days a year. It's not an equal dialogue, let's say.
Yeah,
And-
it's that. Please go on. Sorry.
Okay, well, thanks very much for dealing with those questions. If you're curious to talk to my colleague from the Northwest Minority University from Lanzhou, I can put you in touch if you give me your email.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. I've been to that school in 2019. It was great. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
he left more than 10 years ago, but he knows everybody there.
Yeah.
All right. If you haven't written any questions yet, you still would like to ask Aybike your questions, please do. But I think overall, yeah, I guess Fiz Hoca is asking another problem of the Rishit Hocam. Thanks for joining us tonight as well. Aybike, would you like to?
Yeah, so the
respond to this?
Chinese Central University exam, the Gaokao, is just like our what's it called now? OCC when I took it. It's just like our examination system. So people take the exam and they are placed into different schools. But in China, minorities are given special quotas when they choose to go to minority universities, Minsu Daxues, across the country. But an interesting thing, the Minsu universities were essentially founded to educate Han officials who were going into those regions in the cultures and traditions and histories and languages of those regions, right? But then gradually after the 1980s, they turned into places where minorities like Uyghurs would come to the Uyghur department to study Uyghur and, you know, study Uyghur language and history and so on. So from the older generations of Han scholars, we do have graduates of Minsu universities, but I don't even know anyone studying at those schools today because they are like mostly for the Uyghur for the minority students. So yes, if they choose to go to Minsu universities, minority universities, they're given extra quotas, so it's easier for them to go those schools.
But I wanted to ask if they're accepted to mainstream universities, like the
Yeah.
key departments, like medical,
Yeah.
you know, studies or
Yeah, definitely.
political science, to be politicians in the Communist Party or something.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a matter of passing the exam, but
Okay.
the exam is in Chinese and Mandarin Chinese. So, I mean, you know, the a minority student's command of Mandarin Chinese would be very different than a Han Chinese student. So there are like economic things, dynamics, also certain cultural dynamics playing out there.
Thanks.
We have one more question. I think Sefa is asking. Sefa, would you like to direct your question to Aybike yourself? Or I can read it.
Okay, I can read it. Thank you for your presentation, firstly. I want to ask that, do the minorities, especially the Uyghurs, as in your case, have the chance to get education to learn their ethnic histories or national histories?
I mean, in Minsu universities, if they go to a Uyghur history department, they learn about Uyghur history, but the official narrative. But the unofficial local narratives of Uyghur history are also diverse. There are diverse narratives within the Uyghur communities. So history is more like a it's something about, you know, present instead of the past, right? In a sense. So it just depends on the. Officially, there is no facilities that Uyghurs can go and learn their national history, but the official national history is, of course, taught. And in that official national history, Uyghurs are historically part of Zhonghuа Minsu, the Chinese nation. Did I answer your question?
Okay, if there is no systematic official education for the national histories, how can they find an education for their histories? I want to ask that. Or discourses only, or is there any written sources for them?
Of course, I mean, there are books, right? People talk to each other. I mean, it's not like Uyghurs were not allowed to research their own roots, their own culture, their own origins, right? There's a whole literature about Uyghur ethnography, anthropology, folklore that is produced by the Xinjiang University by Uyghur scholars. But the official narrative is like, the impact of the official narrative is more remarkable today in comparison to the past. So in the past, it was more flexible, and Uyghurs were more autonomous, and but when speaking, so we just probably we need to focus on each specific period and think with the specific dynamics of those periods, because the history of the region is also like full of different developments. Would that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, I have a cough drop in my mouth. It's not a gum. I thought I would say that because Ishik knows I get very coffee.
Yeah. I mean, I should have also, I have a confession too. I mean, earlier when I was introducing Aybike, like obviously it's a Sunday, and I have two kids. One is like young, 2.5. So Normally, I would arrange these things. I was going to go to my office, but I didn't. I couldn't. And he started crying. So sorry about that. And I started to believe that with Aybike because we were together with other shows, not shows, but you know, other interviews, media interviews together. And there's always like some kind of like thing like background like noise, and we should do at energy level. There must be something wrong, but at the end, after each talk, I guess we kind of do a good job. And like this one, I think Aybike did a great job in, you know, presenting her stuff. And I think these are very important, especially these days. But yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed as well. We have yet another question. I think Arhan has a question. Arhan, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Actually, I have written it, but I'm so far to the. Sorry for that. Maybe it's an awkward question too. But you mentioned that Uyghur notion is adopted after the Soviet conference, and the Chinese government accepted it so as to divide the Muslim population over there. Right, for the ones, the Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, etc. So should we consider the Uyghur notion as an ethnic identity in today's politics, or should we just consider it as a population of the Xinjiang region?
No, it's definitely established as an ethnic identity, and it's in the it's definitely an ethnic identity. It's a nation. So to say, if they had territorial integrity and you know, autonomy, they would probably be considered as a nation. But they're accepted as a nationality in China, a Minsu. No, Uyghur doesn't really represent the entire Muslim population in the region. It specifically denotes the Uyghurs as we know them today.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm just quickly looking at any other questions or comments on Aybike's presentation. Wow, it's already 8 o'clock, and we're usually, I mean, 8 Ankara time. We usually have 2 hours with the question and answer. I think this was a very full and exciting 2 hours. And so this presentation, we have indeed this June, we have another guest who will be also talking on Uyghur issues, Elise Anderson of Uyghur Human Rights Project, hopefully, and we'll let you know about that. Yeah, I guess Aybike, would you like to add anything on, or otherwise I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and giving us your time tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me this platform to voice my opinions.
Will you be uploading the recording later? And how can we contact Aybike if we want to talk with her some more?
Okay.
I can put my email address.
Yeah, that would be lovely. And are you posting the recording later?
Yes.
It's already on Facebook, and also in a few days we will put it on YouTube channel.
Excellent.
So like if you follow Dünyanın Ortası YouTube page, or try to find this page on YouTube, there you will see.
We can type it here too.
Yeah, again, exactly.
Since it's Turkish, Dünyanın Ortası. We have all Eurasia Talk seminars so far, all recordings there, by the way, in Dünyanın Ortası, and also in podcast version as well, if you have the chance. Okay. Julia Hocam,
yeah. Okay. So
Turgut Hocam,
we
you guys
can.
have.
we can close again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and hope
Thank
to
you very
see you
much.
next in our next seminars.
Bye. See you.
See you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Görüşmek üzere Aybike. Bye.
Görüşürüz.
Görüşürüz inşallah. İyi yolculuklar.